The French Revolution was the violent conquest of French citizens trying to turn their back on aristocratic traditions and ultimately bring democracy to France. Social unease began in 1774 with the death of Louis XV after losing the 7 Years' War, leaving France nearly bankrupt. His son, Louis Capet, takes over the kingdom with his wife, Marie Antoinette. Louis Capet, an inexperienced and inept 16-year-old boy, becomes Louis XVI. After taking over, Louis XVI drives the French economy into the ground with poorly planned financial reforms. France begins to riot. Robespierre, a young up-and-coming lawyer, helps represent the people of France. The National Assembly, formed by Robespierre, drafts the Declaration of the Rights of Man, stating that every man is truly equal. Soon after, a journalist named Jean-Paul Marat creates a French paper called L'Ami du Peuple, or The Friend of the People. With his paper, Marat convinces the French people to riot in Versailles and force the French royal family to move to Paris. In this process, Louis XVI agrees to sign and solidify the Declaration of the Rights of Man. On June 21, 1791, the king and queen are caught trying to escape to Austria. Shortly after entering battle, French citizens storm the king's castle and he is entirely stripped of his power. The French Republic is born. Robespierre and the National Assembly decide to put Louis XVI on trial for treason. Shortly after, Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette, are sent to the guillotine. However, the revolution is far from over. Soon, citizens begin accusing each other of being counter-revolutionaries, leaving France on the brink of a civil war. To avoid this, Robespierre forms the Committee of Public Safety. He also implements the mass killings of accused counter-revolutionaries via guillotine. Robespierre believed the only way to create a civic virtue amongst the people of France was to create further terror. Soon, deputies declare Robespierre to be an outlaw, and he is beheaded before a large, cheering audience. Many argue that with his death comes the end of the revolution. However, with the closing of this moment in history comes the inspiration for a whole new revolution in Haiti. Pre-revolutionary Haiti consisted of three main social classes: slaves, who had essentially no rights, free blacks, who were mostly mulatto, and the European settlers. After watching the events of the French Revolution unfold, the second-class citizens of Haiti revolted, with leadership from former slave Toussaint Louverture, to ultimately create the first black-governed nation in the Western Hemisphere. One of Toussaint's initial forms of French inspiration came from their period of enlightenment. Many of the works by famous French philosophers provided much steam towards the effort of the French Revolution. In fact, Robespierre consistently met with these great minds to discuss various topics, including the reform of a French society. Toussaint, entirely self-taught in the world of academia, spent much of his upbringing reading French philosophy, which spoke often of individual right and equality. When the French National Assembly drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man, all free blacks and mulattoes were given deserved rights. However, revolutionaries did not reach out towards the enslaved, as there was backlash from plantation owners. This sparked the slave revolt of 1791 and allowed Toussaint to step up as a military leader. One of Toussaint's greatest qualities as a leader was his ability to quite literally say the right thing at the right time. At this state of political unease, it was extremely easy to not only lose one's power and control because of one's words, but also to lose one's life. This low tolerance for ideals was especially prominent in the French Revolution, as countless citizens and leaders like Georges Danton, who was a former close ally with Robespierre, and Charlotte Cordray, the woman who assassinated Jean-Paul Marat, were put to death for simply being considered counter-revolutionaries. Toussaint observed this trend and used it to his advantage. He sought to find the perfect balance between strength as a commander and social observation to not step on anyone's toes directly. A perfect example of this stems quickly after the mulattoes betrayed the enslaved blacks by no longer supporting their freedom. While Toussaint was outraged, he did not speak directly from his emotions by verbally attacking mulatto leader André Rigaud. Toussaint was very adamant about maintaining peaceful resolutions with enemies to spare lives and destruction. Yet, in order to retain the faith in his followers, he recognized the cowardice displayed by the mulattoes. He called them, quote, scoundrels, he cursed the royalists, the British, and the Spaniards. But, despite the intrigues going all around and the intimacy of the letters, there was not a single malicious insinuation against anybody. Recent history from both France and Haiti had shown him that it was extremely easy to lose one's power as a leader, as well as the respect of one's followers after one single wrong move. Toussaint observed the fall of not only huge leaders like Louis XVI, but also that of small governors and generals in Haiti like Laveau and Sonthonax, simply because they made a wrong move, either in military tactics or social injustice. While the French Revolution directly affected the way of life in Haiti through governmental changes, it was Toussaint Louverture who used what he observed from riots, tactical mistakes of Louis XVI and Robespierre, and the message of the French people that led him to form the Haitian Republic. Toussaint saw the amount of blood spilled in Paris and knew that to avoid this fate in Haiti, he could not afford to make the same mistakes. Toussaint was able to identify the mistakes, commonalities, and crucial elements in the French Revolution, such as democracy, Robespierre, Louis XVI, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, Jean-Paul Marat's influence through the press, increased punishment for counter-revolutionaries, civilians fighting the power and each other, and the ineffective and often unjust response from the government, and, of course, the birth of a new republic.